Zoom recording. Got it.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And somebody else is just entering as well. I think Joan was the name. Okay, I'll just let that person connect before I start talking again. It's taking a minute. Okay, it looks like Joan is in now. Okay, so again, I'll just quickly just welcome everybody and just ask you to put your turn your mic off for now. If you haven't already done so, just to cut down on the background noise. We will be answering questions as we go through. So if you have a question, just put it into the chat box. We're monitoring it. I'll try to stop and answer questions once we have a few. Going forward, if you have questions after or whatever, we can talk about how those can be dealt with later. There is a question already in the chat box, and it is, will we be going through the DSQ page by page, or should I close the booklet? I would close the booklet. I'm going to do this a little more organically. I'm going to talk about understanding report 64 kind of big picture and go through what everything actually means in there, as opposed to walking through it page by page, just because that made the most sense to me, and it's information that I had put together. When Michelle originally talked to me about doing this, she did ask me if I could actually walk you through putting a person into CaMs. And I'm not going to do that today. And the reason I'm not going to do that is because it poses all sorts of privacy issues. There used to be a section on CaMs where you could actually go in and do training, but that doesn't exist anymore. So in order to do that, I'd actually have to show you live data or screenshot everything and redact it, which is extraordinarily hard to do. If you've been in CaMs, the person's name can be on the page up to 4 times. So redacting everything is really challenging. So we talked about it, and we talked about instead maybe just focusing on report 64 and walking you through that and walking you through the performance measures for the program. So that's what I'm going to focus on today. And I am going to, as we go through, I will be linking it back to where you're putting that information into CaMs to make sure that it actually comes back into report 64. I will share the presentation with Michelle afterwards in PDF format, so you'll have the actual presentation. So don't worry about that if you're taking notes or whatever. I will make sure I share this presentation with everybody. So before we get started, I'm just going to check the chat box again. I don't see any other questions. We are recording this session today, which if you were in here before, you would know, because Michelle asked me to start the recording again. So I just want everybody to be aware of that. In terms of my experience, I've been working in literacy and basic skills now for more than 25 years, which is kind of scary to say. I fell into this line of work many, many years ago by accident, and I never left. Wasn't what I trained to do, but I really love this field. I currently am the executive director of Lauback Literacy Ontario, which is a support organization much like the Ontario Native Literacy Coalition. And I'm also the program manager at the Grand Erie District School Board for the literacy programs and also the English as a Second Language programs. Our program at the school board is a very tiny program. It's not huge, so it runs very much like a community-based program. I only have one full-time instructor, and I have 2 part-time instructors, and then there's myself. So I'm the manager, but I'm also the data entry clerk, and I'm the person who analyzes the reports and writes all of the reports for the ministry and does all of that stuff, as well as putting all the data into CaMs. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. Sometimes I have one hat on, sometimes I have another hat on, but I kind of have a good big picture because I work at both ends of kind of the program. So I'm going to walk you through this presentation today, and it's organized by the different dimensions that we actually are kind of measured on in literacy and basic skills. So that's how I've approached that. We're going to talk about those measures in terms of data management, data integrity, and data analysis. And we're going to talk about that as it relates to the 5 core measures that we are being evaluated on. And that's in the current fiscal year. It's been like that for several years, but those are the measures that are found in Report 64. So we're going to talk a little bit as we go through the presentation, not just about what the information is, but some processes to collect good data, some processes to input good data, and using data to ask questions and making good decisions. I'm also going to point you in the direction of a few resources that you might be able to access that may give you a little bit of extra help. So if you're watching me and you notice I'm looking down, it's because I've got 2 screens running, as I always do. And I'm actually looking at my down screen, which means my camera's kind of showing me looking down, and that's because that's where my notes are. I just didn't want you to think I wasn't engaging with you if you're looking at my video. It's just the way my computer's set up right now. So in terms of when you are logged into the CaMs application, there are options for reports that come across at the top of that blue bar. And the SDS reports are your service delivery site reports. And that's where you can find all the reports for your own individual agency. So you have an agency number, and when you click on SDS reports, it's going to pull up all the reports that are generated for your agency. There's many different reports that are available. Some of those reports are generated on a weekly basis. Some of them are generated on a monthly basis. Some of those reports are available as Excel or CSV files, which means you can download them and manipulate the data. Most of the reports are PDF reports, though. So they're reports that you can download that the data has fed into from CaMs. As you can see, there's quite a laundry list of reports out there. And if you're new, that might be a little bit overwhelming. Quite honestly, you probably won't use a lot of these reports on a regular basis. But it's good to know that they're there. And when you have some time, it's not a bad idea to actually go through all of those reports, download your most recent one, and just take a look at the information that's in that report. The other thing about reports when you're in the system is that all the reports have a guide associated with them. So the guide is to the right-hand side of the report when you pull up your list, and those guides will give you some support in terms of what information is found in that report and where that information comes from. Quite honestly, the guides aren't fantastic. That's between you and me. I've never found them that useful, but it's still good to know that they're there in case you're looking for something specific. So in addition to your reports that are specific to your service delivery site, you also have a list of reports that are called roll-up reports. So roll-up reports are important. They're also accessed off that blue bar. Roll-up reports are kind of important once you're really comfortable with the data, because what you can do with a roll-up report is compare where you're at in your service delivery agency with where everybody else is in your region or across the province. This can come in quite handy if your numbers, for example, in one of the measures or dimensions is low, and you know why it's low, but it can be interesting to go and look at the provincial or the regional information to see if you're kind of in line with that or not. So it gives you a sense of whether or not you're in line with what's happening in your region or provincially, or whether you're really, really kind of out of the ballpark on those numbers. Looking at the, in particular, for the roll-up reports, probably the most useful is to really look at that Report 64 roll-up. So that's an important one to look at, because that's kind of the report that's the most important one. There are a few other roll-up reports in here that give you either that provincial or regional data. So one thing that's really important is for you to know which region you are a part of across the province. And if you're not 100% sure because you're new, you can probably check with Michelle and she can kind of sort you out in terms of which region you are actually considered a part of. I work in Brantford for my program, so we're actually part of Western region. That's it. The province is divided into four not quadrants, but four different sections, and those four sections are Central, Eastern, Northern, and Western. So in terms of all of those reports I've just talked about, we are going to focus on report 64, but some of these other reports can also be very useful. And I do encourage you to take some time, download them and look at them because they can give you some really helpful information in terms of what's happening with your program. So report 60B is the All Data Service Plan Profile Report. And what it does is it summarizes all the profile information for the learners that you have in your program. And it also gives you summary data for 4 out of the 5 core measures that we're going to walk through today. Report 60D is the all data outcomes and follow-ups. And why this is important is because it summarizes all the outcome information. It tells you what happened when the learners left the program. If you've put that information into CaMs, it will give you a summary of where those learners, what their outcomes were as they left the program. So it gives you summary data on completions and also outcomes at that exit 3, 6, and 12 month point. So in literacy and basic skills, we are expected to summarize exit data when somebody leaves the program, and then we're also expected to follow up with clients at 3, 6, and 12 months and record that information on the exit form and also record that information in CaMs. It seems like a lot, and it is, and it's quite a challenge in many cases to get that data after somebody exits the program. Report 61 is the LBS case activity report. And that has all the data related to service plans that are open, that are approved, and that are active or have been closed. It's a weekly report. And what's interesting about the case activity report is it's one of those Excel or CSV file reports. So when you download it, if you have some expertise in using Excel, you can actually sort the information in that report and kind of mine for data to dig down into your data a little bit advanced. I don't even very often have an opportunity to do that, but it's important to know that that data is available and out there. Today, we're really going to focus, however, on what I consider to be the most important report, which is report 64. That's your detailed service quality report. Although there's many different reports in CaMs, this is the most important because it is the only performance measure report. You use this report to monitor your performance monthly, and you also use it when you complete things like an interim report or a final report. So if you're new, very new, many of you probably just completed something known as the interim report for your program. And this is one of the places where you would have got your information in order to be able to complete that report. That report would be, is your reporting all happens in another part of the system, which is called SP Connect. So SP Connect is the function where your contract is found, where you do all your reporting, where you can find out what your allocations are, where you get all that, any financial information. So that's the place where you communicate with the ministry in SP Connect. CaMs is the place where you put all your data in, and all that data then is pulled and put into all these different reports. Second, sorry, I was just admitting somebody. Just give me 1 second here. So Report 64 shows your performance commitments and actual results related to the 3 dimensions of service. So in LBS, the performance management framework is what they use to kind of govern the programs and ensure that we're meeting the requirements of the ministry. So it is how they decide if the money that they're giving the agencies is being spent in a way that is acceptable, reasonable, and what the ministry expects, for better or for worse. The Literacy and Basic Skills Performance Management System sets out 3 very broad dimensions of service delivery. The first is customer service, the second is effectiveness, and the third is efficiency, in no particular order. So you have these 3 broad areas, which are known as the dimensions of service that we're expected to understand and make sure that we're in compliance with. So when you look at your Report 64, you will see all of these dimensions, customer service, effectiveness, and efficiency on there, as well as the measures associated with each of those dimensions. These 3 dimensions, customer service, effectiveness, and efficiency, are weighted to indicate their value when combined to measure overall service quality. I'm not going to get into the math today because it's a little complicated, and honestly, you don't really need to understand the math. You just need to understand where the numbers come from and how to determine whether or not you're in line or off base and what you can do about it. So within each dimension of service quality, core measures of performance are identified and weighted. So those core measures, so you have your dimension, that's the first column, then you have your measures, and then you have your weight, how they're weighted in the system, and those weights actually add up to 100%. The standard is what you measure your agency performance against, and we are going to walk through that for each one of these measures. So one of the things about the performance management system in LBS that's interesting is that when it was introduced approximately 10 years ago, it might even be longer now, it was to be rolled out in phases with measures, different measures integrated into the different phases. So right now we're in what's called phase 2A. If we move to phase 2B, there will be some changes to the performance management framework, but we don't really know what they are. There are actually 2 measures right now that do appear on your report, but don't count. One is called completions and the other one's called learner gains. So if we move to phase 2B, I anticipate eventually they'll incorporate those 2 measures, and both of those are part of effectiveness. But right now, they aren't included. So we're still in phase 2B, but it's just something to be aware of because you can see the information in particular related to completions when you look at Report 64 right now, even though it doesn't count. You can't really see information about learner gains because what learner gains would be, if it was ever put into place, is a pre and post test, and they're not doing that right now. And I don't think there's any plans for that in any time in the near future, but it's good to be aware of it. So as I said, I'm going to walk you through each of the dimensions, and I'm going to, within each dimension, walk you through each of the associated performance measures. So the first dimension I'm going to talk about is customer service. Within customer service, there are 2 core performance measures: customer satisfaction and service coordination. Customer satisfaction, which is weighted at 15%, is a measure of the service satisfaction from learners when they exit the program. So when a learner exits, there's an expectation that you're asking them a question for them to indicate on a scale of 1 to 5 how likely they are to recommend the LBS program to someone looking for similar services. With respect to service coordination, which is your second performance measure in customer service, it's worth 25%, and it's a measure of how the service provider supports access to and from other education and training, communities, and also community services, so referrals, and how effectively you've incorporated this into the learner's plan. So have you actually recorded this information in the learner's plan, which then has to be recorded in CaMs. So just to kind of give you a little bit of drilling down a bit more on customer satisfaction, it's part of the dimension of customer service. So overall customer service is worth 40%. The first measure, customer satisfaction, is worth 15%. So of that 40%, 15% goes towards customer satisfaction. This number is based on closed service plans only. So you can't capture the information until someone's exiting the program. So the information that gets translated into Report 64 is only based on those closed service plans. Data comes from that question. On a scale of 1 to 5, how likely are you to recommend the LBS program to someone looking for similar services as those you received? So if a learner responds to that question with a rating of 4 or 5, then that is considered satisfied. So if they rate it anywhere less than 4 or 5, it doesn't actually go towards customer satisfaction. You capture this information on your participant exit form. So that actual ministry form that you fill out at exit. And it's entered into CaMs when the service plan is closed in CaMs. The information is found on the service plan homepage in CaMs. Okay, so your target for customer satisfaction is 90%. That means that the ministry expects 90% of the people leaving your program to indicate that they were satisfied with that program. It's pretty high, but traditionally in LBS, we have been meeting this target across the province. I think one of the interesting things about LBS is that we serve so many different learners and we serve so many different needs, and the people coming to us are just are able to get what they need from the program, and typically they're very satisfied with the service that they're given. So with customer satisfaction, there's things to think about in terms of managing that data and making sure you maintain the integrity of that data. So in terms of management, you need to make sure that you're collecting the information. If you don't collect the information, then you're not going to have it. We used to have something called a learner satisfaction survey in LBS, and many agencies have maintained this. So they ask a number of different questions, and that's not a bad idea when a learner exits. And they've included this particular question on the learner satisfaction survey to make sure that they're capturing that data. So you really need to make sure your agency has a formal way way to collect this information. Are you keeping this information in the learner file? So you need to have this information. You need to have backup around this information, whether it be on the exit form itself or also as a backup if you've done a survey. And another thing to think about, and something that a lot of agencies do, is this customer satisfaction data collected at points other than exit? Why would you do that? One of the things that happens in certain LBS programs is that there are critical points where people might drop off. So sometimes programs aren't open over the summer, for example. Even though people might still be enrolled in the program, you might be worried that they might not return if you have a period of closure. So some programs will do a learner satisfaction survey at points where they think learners might not return to program. It might be over Christmas break. If you are taking a Christmas break at your program, you might do a learner satisfaction survey before they leave in case you're worried that people aren't going to return after a break. So it's just something to think about, and it's not a bad idea to survey learners on a regular basis anyways, because it keeps them engaged, and it also can get you a lot of other information. I'm going to stop for a second here because I see a couple questions and I just want to address them because they're specific to this. So the first question was, do all questions have to have a 4 or 5 answer? So there are several different questions on the exit form. It is only the one question that I've spoken of that actually feeds into your performance management score. So it's great if all of your questions have that have a 4 or 5, but the important one is the one that I've identified, because that's the one when you put that information in CaMs that then feeds into report 64, just that one question currently. And the other question was, do all backups of information have to be concrete, or can they be saved as electronic data? I'm a little I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to. If you're referring to something more general, or if you're just referring to, maybe Nicolette, could you unmute yourself and just give me a little more information about that question?
I was asking if it was like, if we fill out forms with them online, for example, over Zoom, could we save a copy to the desktop as well as printing something out, so we'd have like a backup?
Okay, so this is a completely different topic in that there's a lot of things to talk about when you're talking about data. Saving information electronically is tricky unless you're making sure that that information is being stored securely. And there's all sorts of things that you have to look into in terms of making sure that you're storing that information securely if you're storing it online. So that's all I'm going to say about that, because I could do a whole webinar just on storing information securely, but it is something that you have to look into. So yes, Nancy said, would you need a digital locker or something like that? So there's many different ways that you can store information securely online. And it's something that I'm not going to give you a recommendation on, because that puts me in a legal kind of vortex of giving you information that I'm not an expert on. But what I will say is that any information you're storing has to be done so in a secure way. And you need to make sure that you're confident that your organization is doing that and has the policies in place. I hope that answered the question. Okay. It's actually a big question issue problem right now, especially given everybody working online and dealing with because of COVID. So it's something that many agencies are grappling with, and there isn't one easy answer to that question. Okay. So in terms of integrity, one of the things that I'd like to just point out is, prior to closing a file in CaMs, so when you have a learner, they're ready to leave, you're ready to close their file, you should really make sure you have a process in place so that you are sure you've collected that customer service data so that you can actually enter it. So one of the things a lot of programs will do is they'll have a closing file checklist. We use this internally in my program, and it's actually a checklist of all the things you need to have in place before you close a file, to make sure that file is complete and to make sure you've entered all the data into CaMs prior to closing off that file. Because once you close a file in CaMs, there's very little that you can change. So you want to make sure all your data is in there, because if the data is not in CaMs, it's not going to go into report 64. And that is all that the ministry will accept in terms of that performance management data. Okay. So with customer satisfaction, again, you need to make sure that 90% of your learners are satisfied with your service. You won't know that if you're not checking in regularly. So I always encourage programs to review your report 64 on a monthly basis. Sounds like a lot, but once you put it, kind of get used to doing it, it's a really important thing to do. And the other thing I think is really important with Report 64 is that it's something that should be shared, not just with the administration. I know most of you are very small agencies, as am I, but I think it's important to share that data with your instructors and the people actually on the ground. If you have someone doing assessment, if you have your instructors, and make sure that they understand where all the data comes from, because if they don't know that they need to collect the data, then they don't know. So understanding how important the data collection is will ensure that you are collecting more robust data and that you have as much information as possible. And also everybody will understand why they're being asked to collect certain things that they might think doesn't necessarily make sense. But if they understand that that information is important because it goes into Report 64, and that is your performance report for the ministry, it helps people buy into the processes. So if you're not meeting 90% satisfaction, then it's important to look at why and think about that. The best place to figure that out is to ask the learners. Ask them why they aren't satisfied and use that information to try to make changes to the program that makes sense. Survey your learners more frequently. So you do have to survey them at exit, but maybe you do that a little more frequently so you're getting back feedback on a more regular basis. One thing we did in our agency, which doesn't work during COVID if you're actually not teaching face-to-face, is we did put in an anonymous suggestion box. So people are welcome to give us suggestions anonymously while they're in there. And we actually take a look at those. And you know, if there's something that we can improve on it, it helps us. Suggestions, you know, some things that come up frequently are timing, you know, when programming is available. So is it possible to change the hours that you're delivering programming? Are there things that you're not offering that maybe learners would like to engage with? And we're going to talk a little bit about short-term targeted programming options later. It might be looking at what programming are you offering? Is there something else you can do that makes sense that learners would want to access? So the next dimension of customer service, the next measure in the customer service dimension is service coordination. So again, customer service overall is worth 40%. Of that 40%, 25% goes towards service coordination. Service coordination, again, is based on closed service plans. So the reason it's based on closed service plans, although referral information is collected throughout the process, you might not collect that until exit. So that's why it feeds in once they're closed. There's three different ways or three different sources of referral information. The first is referred in. So when you open a service plan, it's captured on the participant registration form or the PRF. There's a place on the form where it asks who referred that person in if they were referred in. There can also be a referral during service. So if while in your program, you make a referral for somebody to another program or agency to support them, that can be added to their service plan in CaMs as a service plan sub-goal. So that's a referral during service. Last but not least is a referral at exit. So sometimes at exit, you refer people on to something else, it might be a different training program. It might be a completely different service that they need access to. And that would also be recorded as a service plan sub-goal in CaMs. The first referral you put in the system that counts is the one that counts. So if you have a referred in when they first come in on your participant registration form, and when you're setting them up, you put that referral in and it's a referral that counts, then that's going to give you the tick for service coordination. So only one of the referrals gives you the tick. However, it's important to collect this information and put it in the system, even if you do more than one referral, because that feeds into some other reports and it gives you good information about where your referrals are coming from and where you're referring people to. There's two types of referral that don't count. They are valid referrals, but they don't give you the tick for performance management in service coordination. And that is referrals in from other EO literacy and basic skills providers. So if my program, say, my school board program that I manage, refers somebody to you, one of your agencies, that referral doesn't actually count in terms of performance. Why? I don't know, but it doesn't. The other type that doesn't count, which to me is even more perplexing, is informal or word of mouth / media referral. So if someone just finds your program on their own informally because you've, done a Facebook ad, or they've just, found out about it because they were walking by, that also doesn't count as a referral. You do put that information in the system, but it's just important to know that those don't count. To me, that one doesn't make sense, because if you're advertising and bringing people in, I think that should be valid, but it isn't. But you still collect that information. So there's a question here. So walk-ins to our center from our community don't count. Technically, no. If you choose as the referred in informal word of mouth, informal or word of mouth media referral, it doesn't actually count towards service coordination. And absolutely, it doesn't make sense. Nancy just said that one is not logical because it asks learners if they would recommend it at the other end. I agree. It's just important to know that this is the way the system was set up. So one of the things we're very, very aware of in our program is that, especially when people are referred from other literacy agencies, or if they're referred through informal or word of mouth, we always make sure that we have investigated whether or not they need to have a referral during service or at exit. So we make sure that we're doing that wraparound piece where we're referring people to other services they need to, and then you do get the referral tech. The target for referrals, though, also you have to weigh this with the target. So your target is 50%. You're only expecting 50% of the learners you're working with to have one of those referrals. So it 100%, the target isn't 100%, the target is 50%. Okay, so Nicolette said, so we need referrals from other programs within our center, such as cultural resource, CRC contact, etc. Yeah, it's not really a matter of, it's more just to be aware, and make sure that you're marketing and make sure that you're capturing the referrals. We'll often see people come in and they'll just kind of show up, and we'll actually ask them, like, did you just show up, or did somebody tell you about our program? And if they say, oh, no, we found out about it from, say, Ontario Works, then we actually track down the referral, because that is a referral. So it can be a little bit of investigation work, or just setting up those processes with other organizations, because it's very easy for people to say, oh, just go over there, call them up, go show up. And it's another thing to actually make sure you have some type of backup or documentation saying they made that referral to your program. I hope that makes sense to everybody. So what you're really measuring here is how the service provider supports access to and from the training and other community services. The idea here is that learners do come to our programs to learn, but often need other supports in place to be successful at doing that, either before, during, or after. So with service coordination, it's quite important from a management perspective to make sure at intake you record that referred in on the participant registration form, if there is one. So make sure that you've got it captured on there. Whoever's doing your intake, It's really important that they make sure that they put that information down, so then it then gets entered into CaMs. Keep track of referrals that you make during service and record them on the learner plan. So we often make referrals for people to other things, and then you forget about it. If you don't put it on the learner plan and then put it in CaMs, you're not going to get that information back out in the reports. Make sure that you record your referrals at exit and record them on the learner plan as well, and make sure they're put in the system before you close that plan. And also, I always recommend that you keep the documentation related to those referrals in the learner file. It might be something as simple as an email where another agency emails you and refers the person, or it might be something more formal like a referral form, a referral tracking form. It's what makes sense in your agency and what makes sense with your referral partners. But I do encourage you to have that documentation in place, so that if your file is audited and you have referrals on your service plan and on your learner plan, then you can show the backup for those referrals. So again, integrity, make sure that a referral in is recorded in CaMs when that service plan is opened. Even if it's a referral that doesn't count, you should still put them in, because you can then get that data out at the other end. There's a report, one of the 60 reports, not 64, but it gives you summaries of that information. You can print that report and see, where are your referrals coming from? If all of your referrals are informal word of mouth referrals and your number is below 50, you might want to look at reaching out to other referral partners, for example. Are your referrals during service and at exit that are recorded on the learner plan entered into the service plan and CaMs? So again, when they come in, if they have a referral, you need to put it in. As they go through the program, if you make referrals, you need to put them on the learner plan and put them in the system. And again, from an integrity point of view, double check, make sure everything's in the system before you close your service plan. That's also part of our file checklist, closing checklist, to make sure we've recorded all that information. Also, knowing what referrals count. So we talked a lot about this already in the previous slide, but as I said, referrals in from EO literacy and basic skills providers or informal or word of mouth media referrals are not included in the performance measure, but still important to capture. Same for referrals out. If you're not sure what referrals count and what referrals don't count, you can actually find that information in the Report 64 guide, so that you get a really good sense of what counts. They're drop-down lists when you're in CaMs. So one of the ones that we use a lot is other structured formal referral. So if it's not in the drop-down list, but it's a legit structured referral from another agency, we use that and make sure that we have that documentation in the file as a backup. Okay, so in terms of service coordination, analyzing what's going on, are we meeting that target of 50%? So are we making sure that at least 50% of the people that we serve either have a referral in that counts, or we've made a referral out that makes sense and counts? And where do I find this information? So make sure you know where to find the information. If you're not meeting that, determine where the gaps are. So this is the report I was speaking of. Report 60B will give you a summary of referral in and referral out information. At the very beginning of the presentation, I talked about some of the other very useful reports. This is one of those reports that can be useful. Make sure you're capturing all the referrals that take place. Discuss it at your service planning meeting. So if you're participating in your local service planning meetings with other community partners, bring it up, talk about it, find out what's going on with referrals in your community. Are referrals down? What agencies aren't making referrals? Why is that happening? Invite referral partners to your site, visit other referral partners. So making connections with other agencies that probably have clients that might also benefit from accessing your service is a great starting point. Not so easy again in the times we're living in at the moment, but something to think about in the future. It's amazing. We've done some of this outreach, not a ton of it, but we find out about something that's popped up, an agency or a group, and we reach out to them and we say to them, like, this is what we do. Is there something we can help you with? We did this with a kind of a moms and tots group that was running locally, and we were able to actually do some targeted training with that group. So there are things that you can do in terms of reaching out, and it also helps with your numbers if you're struggling with numbers. I've just put two resources on this page. One's called LBS Service Coordination Success Stories, and then Marketing and LBS and the Oelcf. So they're just a couple of newsletters that they're older, but they have good information in them if you're looking for ideas around this. Okay, the next dimension we're going to be reviewing is effectiveness. I'm just going to check the chat and make sure we don't have any additional questions in here right now. Looks like we're good. Again, as we go through, if you have a question, throw it in the chat and I'll try to make sure I answer it. With effectiveness, it's a big one in that it actually technically has four core performance measures. So although it has four, only two of them are in play right now, and that is suitability or learner profile, and that's 20%, and then learner progress, which is 30%. The other two measures that don't count right now, but will show up on report 64 are completion of goal path and learner gains. And if we do move into that phase 2B at some point, then these one or more of them will probably come into play. So you don't really need to worry about them so much, but you need to be aware of them and understand that they're there and that they might eventually actually count. So suitability or learner profile, which is worth 20%, is a measure of LBS learner characteristics. It examines and quantifies identified barriers to achieving the learner's goals related to employment, apprenticeship, post-sec education, secondary school credit, and independence. This measure ensures that the service providers are working with clients who are most in need of the LBS services. Suitability learner profile in the performance management system is measured with multiple suitability indicators, and I'll kind of walk you through those in more detail as we go along. Learner progress which is 30%, is a measure of the successful completion of the required milestones on the learner's goal path. All right. So those are the four, but it's really just the two. So overall, it's worth 50% effectiveness. Within that, the breakdown is 20% suitability, 30% learner progress. So the first one under effectiveness is suitability learner profile, measure number 3. So it again is based on closed service plans. And phase 2 includes all 12 suitability indicators. So the phase before didn't include all of them. The phase we're in does include them. This information is captured again on your participant registration form, and it's recorded when creating a case in CaMs and when entering information on the person homepage and in the client summary in CaMs. So one of the things people often miss is the client summary when you're in CaMs. You can actually have a learner in CaMs start to finish and never fill out that client summary piece. So it's very important that you do, because some of this information is actually suitability information that then feeds into performance. So the target this year is 30%. So what you're looking for, what 30% basically means is an average of out of the suitability characteristics. It says there's 12, but there's actually technically it only equates down to 10. So what you're looking for is an average of 3. So you're looking for an average of 3 of these suitability characteristics across all your learners. So it doesn't mean every learner has to tick 3 boxes. What it means is if you have 10 learners, you have 30 of these things in place. Why it doesn't equate to 10 is because OW, OSD, ODSP recipient, no source of income, and Crown Ward are actually all one category, even though it looks like 3. You can only pick one of those. So these are the suitability characteristics. They were identified when this performance management system went into place many, many years ago. And a lot of people, rightly so, argue that they don't all make sense. So for example, over 45 and under 64 is a suitability characteristic that we've had in place for 10 years. We know there's been a lot of focus on youth and supporting youth and a lot of money funneled that way. So it is, it's important just to know that that's still a suitability characteristic. They've never been updated. The ministry's been asked. They haven't, there's not a lot of appetite. They still claim that this is still, this group, this represents those with the most barriers and hardest to serve. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to the chat for a second because there was a comment and it actually refers to the previous section we were talking about. And the question was, it would be useful to hear of any agencies that have had success hosting sessions with their referral partners. So I just wanted to, that's something that Michelle, you might want to make note of. And Byron just said, well, now we're back to talking about suitability. If they never had any training, you can use that. Yes, most people have a number of these characteristics in place. We find that in our agency, anyways, most people have some type of a history of interrupted education. There's lots of reasons or lots of suitability. It's not everybody has to tick every box though, again. So you have to remember that, like, we can serve people who don't necessarily fall within these suitability characteristics. We just need to make sure that we have a significant portion that do, because that is what the ministry deems as those most barriered. So in terms of suitability and learner profile, one of the really important parts from a management perspective is making sure that participant registration form, or PRF, is filled out completely. You need to have all the information on that form when you bring the learner in, because if you don't have the information there, you can't put it in CaMs. And if it's not in CaMs, then it's not going to actually feed into your reports. The other thing that's important is to make sure whoever's doing intake understands which items on the PRF relate to suitability and learner profile in CaMs. And so one of the things we used to do, we don't do it anymore because all my staff has been around for a long time. We had a participant registration form that was a blank, and we actually had all the fields highlighted that were must fill in fields. That really helped people doing intake to make sure that they didn't miss critical information that was needed when you put the client into CaMs. So that's just a strategy to try to help with that. Another thing that's really important is to make sure that your participant reg form and CaMs, your person homepage form and CaMs, is updated if a client later self-identifies to something. So sometimes when a client comes in, they're not comfortable and they don't tell you everything. But later on, they might identify, for example, that they have a disability. So at that point, it's important to capture that information and update their plan, because then that information will feed in. That's just something to think about. With respect to integrity, you always want to make sure that the information you have on the person's homepage in CaMs is correct and up to date. So, I mean, I don't go in and check them all the time, but I do make sure that this information is up to date before I close a file out, because sometimes over the course of somebody being there, things change. Make sure that you fill in that client summary. So it's a separate tab when you're in there. and you need to actually open up and create a new summary and put it in there, because it has a lot of this information in it, and it's a step you can skip and still get away with putting the plan in, but you miss a lot of information. Nicolette, I see you have your hand raised. Did you want to ask a question?
The questions in the
Okay.
in the chat. You mentioned identifying disability as being mentioned later. Is it appropriate for to require paperwork from testing necessary with adults as it is with minors?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
That's a self-identification piece. That is there's a number of things. When you look at the participation form, there's kind of a laundry list of things on the first page. Person with a disability is one of those items, and that is a self-identification piece. So in fact, you're not even really allowed to ask them. All you can do, how we handle that is, we never hand somebody a participant registration form and expect them to fill it out, because we always operate under the assumption that they're at our program because they have some type of a literacy struggle or challenge, and that form is very overwhelming. So we always sit down with them, whether it be virtually or in person, and go through it and read everything to them. When we get to that section, what we do is we say, we're going to read you a list of things, and if you feel that any of them apply to you, you can choose to say so, but you're not required to. And that way, we're not asking them the question, but we're giving them the opportunity to identify. If they have self-identified, that's all you need to do. You don't need backup documentation for that. Okay, so again, back to make sure that client summary piece is in place, and then make sure it's up to date in CaMs. So if something changes, make sure you update it. If we change something on the PRF, we usually have somebody initial it. Same with on a learner plan, like over time, if we make a change on it, we have them initial and date it, just so that we recognize the fact that there's been a change made. Okay, there is a new message here. Just let me. Okay, hold on. So Nancy said, however, what if you need them to have some of those to qualify and they don't volunteer that? So I'm sorry, Nancy, can you just maybe, I'm going to get you to actually ask your question, because I'm not sure in what circumstance you would require.
Sure. Sorry, Robin.
That's okay.
Let's just say they're Aboriginal, for example. That's one of the qualifying points that would have them count in our system.
Yep.
And they have 2 of the 3 qualifying points, but they don't identify that they're Aboriginal. Then we can't, well, I mean, we can count them, obviously, like you said, but the average overall has to be at least 3 for everybody. So that's what I'm worried about. Like if they don't want to volunteer those things, it's harder to qualify them sometimes.
Right. So I just want to back up first of all, just to just clarify, it doesn't have to be 3 per person. It has to be an average of 3 over all of your learners. So one learner might only have 2 or 1, and another learner might have 4 or 5. So that's an important thing to remember. They don't have to have 3 to qualify. You just need to be aware of overall what you're looking at in terms of suitability. So that's important. And yeah, we can't, there's a list of things that you are not allowed to ask them. But what we find is the approach we use, where we read them the list and say they can self-identify if they choose to. Usually they will. If they choose not to, that's kind of their choice. We can't force them to. And that's why I said, over time, sometimes people become more comfortable and do choose to identify. Like, for example, that they have a disability. Does that help?
Well, it does, but it doesn't. Let's say our candidate is over the age of 64. They do not identify that they're between the ages of, I think you said 45 and 64. But we kind of know they might be. I'm just going on by saying if everyone only identifies one suitability criteria, then we're going to have difficulty at the end qualifying overall.
That's correct. You're right.
Mhm.
In terms of the age one, though, you will know because they have to give you their date of birth. Like that's
Right.
so that one you're gonna know. But yeah, you're absolutely correct. If people aren't identifying, then you know it could put you in a difficult position, and that's why, again, it's important to try to you pull that information out without asking overtly. It's tricky. So it's important that you know where you're at, right? It's also important that you manage that. When I'm putting learners in, I like to do like batch entry. So I'll do several files at once, and I'll actually kind of go through them, and I'll look and I'll count, and I'll be like, okay, so I have like, I've got 3 files that I'm putting in the system, and I have 10 suitability texts overall. Like I kind of look at it like that. I don't look at it person by person, and we never deny anybody because they don't have a characteristic. We just don't operate that way.
Oh, so you input everyone, and then at the end. So that's a good technique to follow as well. Input everyone. Sometimes I think we've been, hesitant to input some of the ones that definitely don't qualify.
Yeah, and it's not that they don't qualify. Again, it's that to qualify, you have to be over the age of 19 and an Ontario resident, basically. Like those are the
Right.
there's eligibility. You have to be eligible in the program, so you need a social insurance number now because
Right.
there's certain things you have to have, and it's a pretty short list. So really you can serve anybody. The suitability is that the government, I mean, it's linked to the fact that the government is giving you a bunch of money, or not a bunch, a little bit of money. I mean, none of us got a bunch. And for that money, they want you to try to focus on those most in need of service. According to their list, those people who have those characteristics are those that they feel are most in need of service. So it's kind of like, from their perspective, what they think value for money is. So we have to be aware of it, right? But also remember that this is only one of 5 measures. So you might be low on this one, but you might be high on another one. And at the end, you're looking at that overall score on your service quality report, right? You're looking at that overall, like, what are you at in terms of your overall score? So I think the goal is to be at 6, and you want to be there or over. It's 5.9 or 6. So it's just one measure. So it is, but it's important. It's important to think about it, and to think about, if you're not meeting that, like, why aren't you meeting that? Do you need to do outreach to different groups of people to try to bring them in? Okay. Yeah, so a comment from Joan. This brings up a very sensitive area where folks may not be ready to self-identify. There are so many reasons why someone might choose not to do this. Absolutely, I 100% agree. It is tricky. But also remember, some of the things that you're looking at aren't as tricky. It might be because there's the age one. I'm just going to go back a screen here to the list. So their education history, if they have less than grade 12, if they've been out of school for more than 6 years, if they've been out of training for more than 6 years. So there are other pieces, if they have a history of interrupted education. So there's other ones that aren't as necessarily as sensitive to people. We find that the biggest one, honestly, is person with the disability. We do serve a lot of Indigenous clients in our program, people who live off reserve, but we're right beside Six Nations. So, and we a lot of people do self-identify. So I mean, it's tricky, and you have to be careful, and you can't ask. So you have to give them the ability to let you know if they choose to, by letting them know what the options are, but making sure that they're not being required to tell you that information. So if you're not meeting your suitability criteria, what are the suitability indicators that aren't represented at all when you look at it? So that report 60B, again, it's helpful for this type of analysis. You can also use the sort feature in report 61, but I go to report 60B because it's a lot easier. And then you can think about ways your agency can target underrepresented groups. So are there groups out there that, aside from those that aren't self-identifying, that you might know have those characteristics, are there groups that just aren't represented at all? And can you do outreach to those groups? And another important one that we found, and this is kind of in a, when you're in a situation where your numbers are great and you might actually have to not take clients because you have too many people, which doesn't happen even to us very often. But one of the things that we noticed is with some of our key referral partners, they really didn't understand that we did have suitability criteria. So we can take pretty much anybody, but we do want to spend our money on those most barriered. So sometimes it's as simple as letting them know what your suitability criteria are. And I'm going to give you an example of, for employment services. So if you have referrals going back and forth between employment services and your agency, they also have suitability criteria if they're funded through the same ministry, but their suitability criteria don't necessarily match our suitability criteria. There's some crossover, but there's also some differences. And they don't necessarily know that. So at one point, I actually did this. I took our suitability criteria and I took those for employment services. And I went to our employment service referral partners and said, hey, look, like in order for us to really make sure we're using our resources well, these are our suitability criteria. So just be thoughtful of that when you're referring people. Referring somebody who is, university educated, not really having any literacy challenges, not on any income supports, without any of these criteria, maybe isn't the person that needs to come to our program. So that's just another way of looking at it. Okay. Okay, so just a few tips for eliciting suitability indicators, because this is a tricky one. Read or review that participant registration form, especially the one section with a lot of the criteria in it, with the client to make sure they understand all the sections. Explain. I mean, if you know somebody has a disability, but they're not self-identifying, in conversation, you can explain supports that might be available for them that you're aware of. Not necessarily for them, but for people in general who have a disability. Explain that it's completely up to them whether to self-identify. Build trust. Sometimes, as I said, they might not identify at the beginning, but as they build up trust with you, they might come back to that and actually identify. And make sure that people understand that the information they're giving you is confidential, that the data that you're putting on that form, because you're writing down information about them that's personal on a form, and then you're putting it into a government database, they need to understand that that information is secure, that it's kept locked up, and that on CaMs it's also very secure. So they need to know that it's confidential. There is a resource that I've given you a link here. It's the best practice interviews resource. So it was done by some of the networks a few years ago, and it's just best practices around interviewing clients and eliciting information from clients. Okay, so the second measure in effectiveness that counts is learner progress. And the weight of that within the 50% is 30%. So 30% of that 50% is learner progress. It's actually pretty hefty. It's based on both active and closed service plans. So this is an important distinction. Most of the measures don't feed in until the service plan is closed. This one is based on both active and closed. So what this measure is, okay, sorry, just before I go on with this, there was a note. Can you please include the link from the last screen? So At the beginning, I just mentioned I will share the PDF of the PowerPoint with Michelle, so that link, you'll have the slides. So you'll have the link in the slides. No problem. Okay, so with learner progress, again, very important, it's based on both active and closed service plans. And what it is the percentage of learners who have completed at least one milestone in the current reporting period. Data comes from the attained competency plan item in CaMs, and the target is 60%. So you want to make sure that at least 60% of the learners that are active or that you have closed in the current fiscal year have completed and attained, not just completed, but been successful at attaining at least one milestone. So it's not 100%. There isn't an expectation that every single person in a fiscal year does one. It's that at least 60% have been successful at doing a milestone. So around this, it's important that practitioners have training and understand how to administer milestones. And it's also important that learners know that they're going to do milestones. We integrate this, or it's a great practice to integrate this as part of intake. Let them know we do these things called milestones. They're little mini assessments, and they're just to make sure, they're kind of check-ins to make sure that you are gaining the skills you need while you're here. So that's how we frame it. We find that actually, because we frame it that way, it's not a big high stakes test. It's just something that they do. A lot of learners actually like doing them. Sometimes they ask for another, like they're like, when can I have my next milestone? Which is crazy because technically it's a test, but because we treat it in a way that it's a check-in, it's a way to show that you're progressing. A lot of people like to have that feedback. You need to make sure that instructors have access to the milestones. So there's a portal that everybody has to have a login to get into the portal to be able to download the milestones. And you need to make sure that at least one milestone related to that learner's goal path is identified on the learner plan. So if there isn't a milestone on the learner plan that they're working towards, then that's definitely problematic. And you also your learner plan activated in the system, you need to have at least one milestone on there that's in progress or started. So that doesn't mean it's completed. It just means that you've gone through the steps of putting it on the learner plan and then entering it into CaMs and then starting it, so that you know that the learner is working towards that. With respect to integrity, you want to make sure there's a process in place to make sure that completed milestones are recorded in CaMs. If you don't put it into CaMs, it's not going to feed into your performance management. The completed milestones need to be stored in the learner's file. So that is one of the things that should be on your closing checklist. You need to make sure you have copies of those completed milestones in the learner file. And if your files are audited, that's what they'll be looking for. They'll be looking at your learner plan and they'll see what's on your learner plan. And then they'll be looking to make sure that those milestones are actually in there and completed. Make sure that when they're completed, they're updated in CaMs in a timely fashion. So if somebody completes a milestone, you need to make sure that CaMs gets updated with that information. On the learner plan is also important, that paper-based or virtual version of your learner plan, but in CaMs is the only place that it's going to feed into your performance. And another thing that's really important, before you close somebody out, make sure all your milestones have been entered into CaMs. Don't miss something, that got lost in the shuffle. Figure out a process with your learner files that makes sense in your program to make sure that those things don't get missed. If 60% of your learners aren't attaining one milestone, if at least 60% are, you need to think about that. So just some suggestions: make sure you have clear processes in place so that learners and practitioners understand the expectations around the completion of milestones. Everybody has to be on board with it or it's not going to happen. Make sure that ongoing training delivery includes a variety of task-based activities that will help practitioners and learners know when they're ready to attempt milestones. So milestones are task-based assessments. They're meant to replicate something that might happen in the real world when a learner leaves the program. And the programming that we deliver in LBS also is task-based. So you need to be doing that type of programming on a regular basis. And then a milestone isn't going to be a stretch for a learner because they're going to be used to that type of learning. Okay, I'm going to go back to, there's a question. In CAMs, when closing, make sure they are completed and attained. Absolutely, yes. And just Michelle did say, she put the evaluation link for this. We're getting close to the end of our time. So I think she said there's a prize if you fill it out. So she just put that in there for you as well. In terms of learner progress, again, best practice interviews resource, there's one around this topic, and the link is in the presentation. So you will have a copy of that after if you want to take a look at that. Some other resources I just popped in here to support learner progress. So the milestones are the assessment, but before people do assessment, you have all sorts of programming. So there's so many resources out there, but these are just a few. You have on the ONLC website your task-based activities that were developed specifically for your stream. So that's an important place to go for resources. In addition, there's another website that's provincial that is the task-based activities for LBS. So there are additional task-based activities there. And the other resource I've popped on this page is the Common Assessment for the Oelcf goal paths. So this is a package of assessment tools that were kind of pulled together according to each of the 5 goal paths. And there's just a ton of resources in there. So good place to go if you're looking for stuff, especially just assessment related resources. So that's not the milestones, but other things that will support as you're delivering your programming. I have to pick up the pace here because we're almost at a time. So I'm probably going to end up going a few minutes over the 11:30. And so if you have to leave, I won't be offended. Just leave if you have another commitment. If you're willing to stay, I'll just finish off what I'm going to do with efficiency. And again, if you have to leave early, don't worry because you'll get a copy of the presentation. And if you have a question, just send it through Michelle and I'll be happy to answer afterwards. So the third and last dimension I want to talk about is efficiency. So for efficiency, there's one core performance measure. Efficiency is worth 10%. It's not actually weighted that high, but there's a lot of focus on it. It measures the percentage of the targeted number of learners with an active learner plan who are served. So even though the weighting for efficiency is low, it's only 10%. As I said, there's a lot of emphasis on this measure. The ministry is very focused on numbers. It's because it's quantifiable for them. If they can say we serve this many people, that's a great number, like it's a great quantifiable thing for them to hang their hat on. And that's why there's a lot of focus on this, even though it's only worth 10%. So with efficiency, this is your measure number 7 on the report. There are only the 5 that count right now, but they're numbered. I've numbered them in here according to how they show up on the service quality report. So this number includes all learners with an active learner plan that have been served. Only one service plan per learner is counted. So if you have 2 service plans for the same learner within 1 fiscal year, only one of them counts. Why I bring that up? Because we have people who leave and come back all the time. And sometimes we do have 2 service plans for the same learner within 1 fiscal year. It's the nature of what we do, but it's important to know that only one of them will count. And only service plans with at least 1 milestone are included. So that milestone has to be either in progress, which means it's been started, or completed in CAMs in order for that person to count as a tick in your numbers. So when you look at your service quality report, it says the target's 90%. That's a provincial target. Each service delivery agency actually has a performance commitment target of 100%. So the expectation is whatever number of learners it says you are going to serve on your transfer payment agreement, that is how many learners they expect you to serve in a fiscal year. And this is something that a lot of programs struggle with, from one end of the spectrum to the other. So many programs struggle with not having enough learners, right to a lot of programs struggle with having too many learners for the amount of funding that they have, and they have to manage it the other way. The last fiscal year was an anomaly in that, there was a lot of strain on this particular measure because of COVID and people adapting to how they were going to deliver non-traditionally, whether it be how they would do that online, correspondence, however they did it. And a lot of programs saw this number drop significantly. There's also hesitancy, even as things start to open up. I think there's still some challenges here because a lot of learners are hesitant to come back into programs. So it's important. You need to know what your number is. You need to know where you're at with the number. And I think going forward, even in this current fiscal year, there's an increased emphasis on this again. I think people got a bit of a pass last year if they weren't meeting this particular performance number, but there's a lot of pressure to bring those numbers back up in the current fiscal year. In terms of management and integrity, you need to make sure you know how many learners you're supposed to serve. That's on Schedule E of your service delivery agreement, which you find on SP Connect. You need to make sure your learner plans are developed in a timely fashion for each learner. And you need to make sure they're put in the system in a timely fashion into CaMs. If the information isn't in there, then you're not going to get the tick for the learner, because the only place you can actually prove that is if you put it into CaMs. You also want to make sure all your service plans are active in the system. If they're not active, they don't count. As you're putting a learner in the system, there's different stages. And in order for them to count, you have to be in the active stage. When you're in CaMs on your workspace, if you click on the View My Files in CaMs, there's a list of all your learners, and on the right hand side of that page, it will tell you at what stage they're in. If you have somebody that doesn't say active, it means you haven't completed putting that person in. You also want to make sure all your service plans in CaMs have at least a completed milestone, or have one that's in progress. So it has to be in progress in order for them to be active. So you're asking yourself with learners served, are you meeting your numbers? If you're not meeting your numbers, there's many different things to think about. For example, what client group could you target that you're not already serving? Report 6TV will help you with this, because you can get a sense of where your referrals are, who's referring to you, and also a sense of what characteristics are overall are showing up in your program. Think about who your current referral partners are. What other partners could you focus on? Are your services accessible? Do they make sense to people? Can people access them? Could you offer itinerant or mobile service? So is there a place, that isn't the location you normally work at, that you could reach out to people that would be more accessible for them? We've been doing, virtual delivery, blended delivery. We've been doing just about everything under the sun to try to reach people right now. Do your operating hours meet the needs of learners? Is your agency contact information and service description up to date on the web, social media, print material? This is an important one because this often gets missed over time, especially when there's turnover in organizations. So make sure all of your information that's out there is up to date. Google yourself, Google your agency, see what it says. And make sure that you're offering programming that meets the needs of clients being served by other key partners like Employment Services or Ontario Works. So what type of programming would make sense for clients that they're referring? Is there some specialized things that you can do? If you don't know, talk to them and ask them. and just a comment from Nicolette. So many of the people I speak with said they want to continue with online. I think that's a trend across the province, Nicolette, and it will be interesting to see how the ministry handles that, because I really can't get a sense of where they're going to land on that in terms of policy decisions. We have e-channel in place, which is online delivery, and that's a very specific service. What most agencies are doing, I don't think it's quite nearly the same thing as e-channel. It's definitely a different mode in that, it's just trying to meet the needs through different mechanisms. So I don't know where we're going to land with that. And Michelle says GLA, Good Learning Anywhere, will address this tomorrow in their presentation as well. So yeah. Okay. This is just something that a lot of programs have kind of trended towards, and that's, you might have heard the term targeted training. So what targeted training is short-term focused programming that can be used to target specific needs or specific groups of learners. Usually there's a start and a finish to it. It's not just a learner who's coming in to generically upgrade their skills. They're coming in for something very specific. You have specific curriculum. They go through that curriculum to meet their needs. It's meant to address the needs of learners, and it can actually really help to support the development of partnerships with other agencies. In the agency I work in, and it's actually not on this page as an example, but many, many years ago, we went to employment services and we said, you know what? We know you want to refer people to us and you refer people to us, but what is it that your clients are really struggling with that we could help with? And they said digital skills. So what we did is we came up with a digital skills targeted training program that's really focused on employment. And we asked them specifically, what do people specifically need to work on? And that's been a fantastic program for us, because employment services knows when they refer somebody for digital targeted training, they come in on a certain date, they're finished on a certain date. So it's not like an endless program, and they know what skills they're going to gain while they're with us. Other examples: time management and organization, budgeting, preparing for healthcare occupations, preparing for office administration, soft skills, customer service training. So these are just a few examples, but it's something to think about. Think about your community, what the needs are, what the jobs are out there. And does it make sense for you to put together, or just grab some curriculum that's already available and offer some of these, this type of programming? Think about who your referral partners are now, who can you target? And again, use that report 60B, that all data learner profile, to find that information. I would say 60B is probably your second most important report, because it gives you a lot of information. And last but not, this is just another resource that I thought I'd bring your attention to, which is basically, it's the Literacy Resources and Discussion Forum. It's a Moodle site. It's set up like a website, and it's a place where there's a ton of resources housed. And it has a search function. So if you go there and search for targeted training, it's going to pull up a whole bunch of resources that are out there already that you can download and take and modify to meet your own needs of your particular agency, stream, whatever makes sense for your program. So I just wanted to bring your attention to that. And that is all the information I'm going to load onto you today. It was quite a bit. And I'm just a little bit over time, but I'm happy to take some questions again, any other questions that people have. I just need to find the chat box again, which I accidentally closed a minute ago. Okay, so just you're very welcome, Nancy. She was just thanking me. Does anybody have any questions? We can actually do hands up, or and you can speak at this point if you'd like.
Good morning, Robin. Thank you so much for an informative session. My question was around milestones, and if we had a learner who no longer showed up, and a milestone is in their learner plan, what's the difference between not attained and canceled? Like if they're not going to return to the program and they haven't attempted that milestone?
Yeah, so not attained in my brain means they tried it and they weren't successful.
Mhm.
And if they just never did it, I would cancel it.
And is there any penalty for using canceled versus non-attained?
Both aren't going to count anyway, so not really.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. So with not attained, also remember, if somebody doesn't attain a milestone, it doesn't mean they can never try it again.
Mhm.
So if somebody is unsuccessful, that's okay. You can actually re-administer the milestone. You're just supposed to wait. They recommend about 6 weeks. But I mean, wait long enough that they're not going to be successful just based on memory, but long enough that also that they do get the skills they need to complete it. So you can actually re-administer it and put it on again. Okay. Anybody else have any questions?
And it's been my experience that the questions usually come after we're off air.
That's fine.
So I will.
Yeah, if you have any questions afterwards, just let Michelle know and I'll be happy to try and answer them for you. I'm always happy to answer questions.
Well, I'll take this opportunity to thank Robin for a very informative. There's things in there, Robin, that I didn't know. Again, every time I hear you give this presentation, I learn something new. So we have a draft every day for a $50 gift certificate at the keg. So I'm going to make that draw. Here's everybody's name. And the winner is Nicolette Marion from Windsor. Hey. So we'll get that to you, Nicolette.
Fantastic. Thank you.
You're welcome. And then tomorrow, I just wanted to remind you that GLA is coming in. Robin referred to some of the online things. Well, they're going to address some of those issues as far as like guys getting credit for the blended learning aspect, and also for referring them to GLA. So both GLA and your programs can get credits for that. So they'll address some of those issues as well. And also, I just wanted to remind everyone about the Friday webinar that we have. It's our last apprenticeship webinar, and Aboriginal Apprenticeship Board of Ontario will be doing the presentation. So if you haven't registered, then please register. Okay, if there's no more questions.
Michelle, I actually had a question. It's Lady Ann. I think I missed that opportunity to register for that workshop. How do we do that for Friday?
We'll send you a link. I think that a link was sent out to everyone. So we'll send it out again though to everybody.
Wonderful. They've been very informative. And also I missed yesterday's webinar. When will those be posted, and will it be through ONLC or another site?
We'll have them. We're recording them actually, and so we will put them on our YouTube channel.
YouTube.
You weren't here at the very beginning, and I said
No.
that our guy who puts them on our YouTube channel is in Alberta, freezing his mind off to watch the soccer game tonight. So,
Oh, great.
So he'll be back tomorrow So we'll try to have it on by Friday or early next week anyway.
All right, miigwech.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. You guys have a great rest of the day. It's beautiful out. Try to get outside sometime. Thanks, Robin.
You're welcome. Do you want me to stay on just to make sure because I'm the host right now,
Oh, sure.
to make sure we do whatever we need to do? I guess I should stop.
Hi,
recording.
Robin. I actually have a question. Would you be able to provide your email in case we had any questions regarding like the reporting on CAMs? I just think it would be really helpful to have you as a resource to look to since you're really knowledgeable.
Michelle's laughing because she knows I never give my email out. I don't, and the reason I don't do that is because I get inundated with emails. So as long as you promise not to inundate me, I'll give you an email, and I don't promise to answer super quick. Usually I tell people if you can find my email, you can email me, but
Alexi, that's why we said go through me and then
yeah,
we'll get the answer for you.
it's okay. I put it in there, Michelle, but
Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Uh-oh, because it's being recorded. Now everybody will
Oh.
have it.
shoot, I forgot to stop recording. Oh no, now I'm in trouble.
Yep. Now you're in trouble. You
Uh-oh.
put it out there.
I'm gonna